Our top story, the war in Ukraine rages on and a lot has been said about the fierce resistance put up by Kyiv. The Russian military has suffered multiple setbacks on the battlefield, and it's the hidden hand of the West which has armed the Ukrainian soldiers. Western powers have sent Ukraine an array of weapons in an attempt to help its forces fight the Russian troops. From long-range rockets to howitzers, anti-tank weapons, which are shoulder-launched, and even tanks and drones have been supplied to Ukraine. Ukrainian forces have used these to devastating effect. The US-supplied HIMARS rocket system has proved to be the most lethal. But apart from these tangible assets, there's something more which is aiding the Ukrainian command and control centers. According to reports, NATO is clandestinely passing on real-time information about Russian troop movement to Kyiv. NATO is apparently using its airborne warning in command planes to track and trace the movement of Russian military. And all this is happening from outside of Ukraine's borders, much to Russia's fury. Warning and control system aircraft flying inside Poland's borders skim through the neighboring Ukrainian ground and airspace and pass on real-time inputs to Kyiv. Ground radars and AWACS gather intelligence through radar and other surveillance technologies. The radar system is designed to detect aircraft, ships, vehicles, missiles and other incoming projectiles. The radar mounted on the aircraft allows the ground-based operators to detect and track targets much further away than a similar ground-based radar. NATO AWACS aircraft are capable of operating for about 8.5 hours. These jets fly at 30,000 feet and can cover a surveillance area of more than 300,000 square kilometers. The aircraft are capable of flying longer operations due to their air-to-air refueling capability. Experts say critical information passed on to Kyiv's forces may have played a major role in assisting its soldiers, who have not just stunned the Russian advances but also launched a fierce counter-attack. Ukraine has taken back hundreds of kilometers of its territory from the Russian forces. The ground movement of Russian troops and real-time information about Russian missiles is said to be helping Ukraine to combat them successfully. So how is this playing out on the ground? For more on that story, we're now joined by Dmitry Babij, a political analyst who joins us from Moscow. Thanks very much, Mr. Babij, for joining us on WION. Now, how is Moscow reacting to these reports that NATO is providing real-time inputs about Russian military movements to Kyiv?
Well, surprisingly as it may sound, Moscow reacts in a calm way. Very calmly, because this is fitting the Russian official narrative that this is not a war of Russia against Ukraine, it's the war of NATO against Russia. In any other part of the world, the participation in the combat on the side of the West is so big that certainly this would be considered as co-belligerence, has participated in the war, because there are not just Western volunteers, thousands of them, fighting in Ukraine. We have the most sophisticated Western intelligence systems operating against Russia. We have billions of dollars of worth of Western arms. So this is basically a war of NATO against Russia, and this has to be admitted. And Russia doesn't make a secret out of it.
Very interesting. You're saying even though Russia has chosen to react calmly to this, in your words, this is a provocation and it basically proves that this is a war between Russia and NATO. But it seems like Russian military assets are at risk thanks to NATO's surveillance. How is Moscow likely to counter this challenge?
Well, if you look at the map, the so-called counter-offensive of Ukrainian troops, they took back maybe 1/30 or 1/40th of the territory that has been taken by the Russian army since February 24th, when the hostilities aggravated. Let me remind you that actually Ukraine has been leading a war against two of its separatist regions since 2014. So to say that the war started in February 2014 is simply not correct. It started when the West ousted the legally elected President Yanukovych from power in February 2014. But if you look at the map, Moscow has just retreated a little bit in Kharkov and to a lesser extent in Kherson region. Now that Russia has started mobilization, there will be fresh troops arriving to the front line. And in general, of course, Russia is more motivated than Ukraine, and Russia has a bigger military and economic capability. Ukraine is sustained now by Western funds. Without the West, Ukrainian economy would not be working. And basically, sooner or later, of course, Russia will win. The West is just making people suffer more by supplying all of these deadly weapons and by supplying this intelligence.
Okay, interesting. You say the war actually began all the way back in 2014. And while it is well known that Russia's military capabilities are far superior to those of Ukraine, fact of the matter is, even if it's thanks to NATO's assistance and involvement, the Russian troops have suffered serious reverses on the battlefield in recent weeks. Now, Russia has been warning the West about sending weapons to Ukraine. Do you believe these AWACS that are providing crucial inputs to Kyiv can further heighten tensions between Moscow and NATO?
Yes, these AWACS airplanes can heighten tensions, and of course, the destruction of the gas pipelines from Russia to Germany, which was of course operated by some forces connected to the United States and to East European countries which hate Russia. There is no secret about it. Certainly Russia and Germany were not interested in destroying these gas pipelines. The attack against the Crimean bridge, these are all terrorist acts which try to hit Russia at the very heart. In this situation, Russia very unwillingly started to bomb the Ukrainian infrastructure. Let me remind you that this infrastructure was built by Russians and Ukrainians together in the times of the Soviet Union. So it breaks our heart to do it, but this is the only way to limit the capacity of NATO to strike Russia. The other variants, such as hitting at NATO countries, are simply excluded because we don't want a world war. We already have a war of NATO against Russia, but let this war at least remain limited to Ukraine right now. It's interesting that Ukrainian troops are trying to expand it to the Russian territory. If you look at the number of times Belgorod was bombarded, a Russian city next to the border of Ukraine, you can see that this is the strategy of, not of Ukraine, I think, but of NATO, because Ukrainian forces do not do anything without orders and advice from NATO.
All right, this is a tragedy for Ukraine and NATO. You say many would argue that Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February of this year has been the biggest tragedy, and we don't know yet who's responsible for the explosion on the Crimean bridge and for the Nord Stream gas pipeline leaks. The jury on that is still out, but Dmitry Babish, appreciate you joining us on WION. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also joining us for more on this story is WION The World, a journalist who is in Amsterdam. Mr. The World, thanks very much for speaking to WION. How crucial do you believe is advanced surveillance in a conflict? Surveillance of the kind that we are referring to in this context. Mr. The World, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I don't see any picture, only the logo.
All right, we will try and fix that glitch. But in the meantime, I hope you can hear me and answer my question. What I'm trying to ask you is, how crucial do you believe is advanced surveillance in a conflict, given the Russia-Ukraine context and given reports that are now emerging of NATO actually providing real-time information about Russian troop movements to Kyiv, which many believe has been absolutely crucial in letting Ukraine have an advantage over Russia in this war so far?
Yeah, so if we speak about the assistance that Ukraine is getting from the West, so indeed, I think that Ukraine wouldn't be able to fight that long for the last 8 months without having this assistance from the United States, from the West. But I think mainly from the United States, if we are talking about the military assistance and the military different kinds of systems that they are getting from the US. So for sure, it helps them a lot. But I think that we also need to understand that the Ukrainians themselves, they are the ones who are fighting on the ground, and they are the ones who were able to surprise, I think, many people in the West and also in Russia by being able to win against the Russians on the ground. They at the start of the invasion, they were able to cause a huge amount of casualties to the Russian army who advanced during February and March. And many people didn't believe that this is what will happen. Many people, many analysts expected at the time that Russia will be able to control most of Ukraine very quickly. Some people even spoke about getting into Kyiv within a week from the start of the war. But it didn't happen. What we saw was a very, I think, a strong performance by the Ukrainian army, and they were able to resist very fiercely towards the Russians and to basically push them back. And this is one of the reasons why we are at the moment still in this war. And the more the Ukrainians are succeeding, so the bigger the assistance that the West providing them. And we see it from the US, from NATO countries. And this is where we stand at the moment, actually, in a very, I think, dangerous point in the war, which might escalate dramatically in a few weeks.
In fact, that's what I wanted to come to next. You're saying this is a very dangerous point in the war. Yes, the Ukrainian forces have surprised the whole world because Russia was hoping to actually finish this war in just days or perhaps weeks. But the war has now dragged on for 8 months, and it now turns out that NATO has a lot to do with it. So how do you see the fact that while NATO does not have a direct military involvement in this war, it is providing intelligence about Russian military movements to Ukraine? When you say we're at a dangerous point, are you saying we could see a serious escalation between NATO and Russia?
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest threats at the moment, is to a bigger escalation, which become a direct conflict between Russia and the West. I mean, Russia and NATO, or even maybe Russia and the United States. I think that both sides are not interested in that scenario, but it might happen, it could happen. It really depends on the development on the ground within the next few weeks, I believe. We heard people within the US administration saying very clearly that if Russia will, for example, use kind of tactical nuclear weapons on Ukrainian soil, so it might lead to a response from the US and NATO, a conventional one, against Russian forces within Ukraine. So if we get to this point, the problem with this is that the escalation could be very quick. And the dynamics of this escalation are very, very hard to stop. And therefore, I really hope that we won't get to this point, but we need to understand that this is a possible scenario, and it might happen if things will escalate within the few weeks, even worse than what the position where we are now.
All right. Well, nobody wants to see an escalation of this conflict. It's not just Ukraine, but really the entire world is suffering on account of this war. Everybody wishes to see the return of peace and normalcy, but can we really hope for it anytime in the near future? That remains a million-dollar question. You believe we're actually at a very dangerous point in this conflict. We'll have to wait and see how it pans out over the next few weeks. Thanks very much, Mr. Navot, for joining us on WION.